Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're digging into a bunch of posts from X that you sent over, along with all the context. Our mission: to pull out the key insights, the surprising bits, and connect the dots so you can get up to speed fast.
Exactly. We've got a real snapshot here. Tech, AI, space, global trade, even some social stuff. It's all about getting under the hood of the material you shared.
Okay, let's get into it. We have quite a few things to cover, kicking things off with AI, which is moving incredibly fast, right? First up, Rowan Chung posted about Apple's WWDC keynote.
That's right. Rowan mentioned a big UI revamp, user interface changes, but felt it was, and I quote, pretty light on Apple Intelligence.
Yeah, and the context around that really feeds into those ongoing worries about Apple's AI progress. CNET reported, actually just June 10th, that problems developing Siri were bad enough they had to delay features, push them from the iPhone 16 all the way to iOS 18.1.
And this isn't just Apple. It kind of reflects a bigger trend. There was a Stanford study, I think back in 2023, that found something like 60% of tech companies were missing their own AI timelines. So Apple being light on AI, maybe it's less a failure and more strategic caution, given all the hype out there.
That's one way to look at it. The keynote coverage did seem to focus a lot on the new liquid glass design, getting stuff rolled out across all their devices. Maybe they're thinking, let's nail the hardware, the stuff people can actually see and touch, rather than pushing AI that's maybe still a bit, well, half-baked for prime time.
It's a good question for you listening. When a giant like Apple seems to be hitting the brakes a bit on big AI reveals, what's that signal about the state of consumer AI right now? Is focusing on polish and hardware actually the smarter move for them currently?
Speaking of getting the most out of AI, Greg Eisenberg had this post with a really strong analogy. It was about using the Claude AI without something called MCP.
Yeah, he put it really bluntly said, using Claude without MCP is like having an iPhone just for calls, his claim. Takes 10 minutes to set up, and you'll outperform 99.9999% of humans, which is a pretty bold statement.
Wow, 99.999%? That sounds almost too good to be true. What exactly is MCP? What's it doing that gives such a boost?
Well, based on recent research, like from Anthropic themselves in 2024, MCP multi-content prompting it likely means feeding Claude different types of data at once, not just text, but maybe images, code snippets, data tables, you name it. And doing that apparently boosts its performance on complex stuff like reasoning by up to 40%. It's that integration.
Okay, 40% is huge. So why isn't everyone doing this? Greg Eisenberg hinted at it, and there was a reply from Brian Esparza, plus a study mentioned from Nature, Human Behavior in 2021. Seems like it's just, well, human nature.
Pretty much. That study found, what was it, 68% of people stick with what they know, even if a new way is clearly better. It's like inertia or maybe just comfort with the familiar.
And that has real consequences, right? Greg's left in the dust comment.
Exactly. There's a 2025 MIT report that backs this up, found that professionals using advanced AI tools, about 25% of them are already outperforming colleagues who aren't. So it's not some future thing. The skills gap is happening now.
Makes you think. So, for you, are you really digging into what your AI tools can do? Or is that tendency to stick with the easy, familiar way holding you back from maybe getting a lot more out of them?
Now, shifting gears a bit to the big players, the industry itself, Sheel Manat posted some major news about Meta.
Right. Sheel reported Meta is taking a huge 49% stake in Scale AI, the price tag, $14.8 billion. He noted investors and employees are getting paid, which is interesting, and his take was Meta probably wanted the whole company but did this structure to sidestep regulatory headaches.
Yeah, and it makes a lot of sense. You remember Google's deal for Wiz, $32 billion. That got stuck under heavy DOJ scrutiny last year. Regulators are definitely watching these big tech acquisitions. So Meta coming in just under 50%, well, it looks like a clever way to maybe avoid triggering those automatic, tougher reviews from the SEC and others. Microsoft has done similar things.
It's a smart move, potentially. And part of this deal, Scale AI CEO Alexander Wang, who's only 28, he's going to lead Meta's new superintelligence lab. So it's not just money, it's talent and leadership for their big AI push, which really kicked into high gear after ChatGPT arrived,
Definitely. And that structure, paying shareholders directly for that 49% stake, it seems tailored to those SEC rules where hitting 50% ownership brings much stricter oversight. It really feels like a pattern we're seeing big tech finding creative ways to structure deals to get the expertise and control they want while navigating the regulatory landscape.
So for you thinking about this, how are these tech giants managing these regulatory hurdles to keep pushing AI forward? And what do these kinds of complex deals signal about where the AI industry is heading in terms of consolidation and control?
And sticking with AI, OpenAI themselves had an update.
Yeah, pretty direct post from them. Their new model, O3 Pro, is rolling out now, available to all Pro users in ChatGPT and via the API.
And they're framing this as a big step up. The context materials mentioned it builds on their O1 model. Remember, O1. Their own tests showed it solved, like 74% of A math problems, those super hard ones, compared to just 12% for GPT-4o. So the expectation for O3 Pro is even better performance, especially on tricky reasoning tasks.
It also comes bundled with better tools like web search and Python execution, which matters because there was a Nature study in 2023 that found integrating tools like that can make AI models significantly more accurate, maybe 15–20% better on technical problems.
Right, so this O3 Pro replaces O1 Pro, and it's clearly aimed at competitors like Google's Gemini 2.5 Pro.
Oh.
And the context really stressed reliability. OpenAI said O3 Pro hit 90% reliability in their internal tests across different scenarios. That seems to be a key focus now.
Makes sense. So for you, how do these regular, powerful updates change how you might use AI day to day? And how much does that focus on reliability matter when you're actually depending on these tools for answers or tasks?
Okay, we've hit AI software pretty hard. Let's move to autonomous hardware, stuff that moves itself, on the ground and up in space.
And you can't talk self-driving without Tesla. Their post was, well, classic Musk, just two emojis. That's it.
Super cryptic. But yeah, the context points strongly towards a tease for their Robotaxi launch. Bloomberg reported they were targeting June 12, 2025 for a start in Austin, Texas. This fits with Tesla saying they're prioritizing Robotaxis over, say, a cheaper, regular electric car right now.
But a slick emoji tease doesn't solve the real-world problems, right? The context notes that NHTSA, the highway safety folks, they opened an inquiry just last month, May 2025, specifically looking at how these robotaxis handle bad weather. And Teslarati's been covering the ongoing tests in Austin and San Francisco. Reliability in messy, real-world situations is still the big question.
Yeah, it's different from their big Autonomy Day presentation back in 2019, which had more detail. And you still see studies, like one from AAA in 2023, showing that even though the tech's improving, getting these things to work safely everywhere all the time is still a huge challenge.
So for you, that emoji post just hype-building buzz, or is that June 12th Austin date actually happening? And what do you think is the single biggest hurdle left before we see robotaxis everywhere?
Robert Scoble also jumped into this, comparing Tesla's upcoming Cybercab to Waymo. He had a really interesting point about how Tesla funded this whole thing.
Yeah, he really zeroed in on that, how Tesla customers have basically paid for the R&D, paid for the cars, and provided the training data through buying full self-driving. He seemed pretty convinced, ending with, "The world is about to change deeply."
And based on what he's seen, Scoble lifted potential Cybercab advantages over Waymo. Better sound, quieter ride, automatic doors, maybe smoother AI, faster trips, and crucially, that massive fleet advantage for data gathering.
Though the context adds that little detail, the U.S. Patent Office wouldn't let Tesla trademark Robotaxi, said it was too generic. And Musk is aiming for Cybercab production before 2027, despite, Tesla's history with production timelines.
Scoble's view connects to this idea that people might be shifting away from owning cars, maybe even from Uber or Lyft, towards autonomous services, especially if they're cheaper. And Tesla, having had customers effectively subsidize the tech development via FSD, might be positioned to offer that lower cost.
It's a really different model. So could the Cybercab actually be the thing that shakes up city transport? And thinking bigger, what does it imply when customers have essentially funded the creation of the product that might replace what they bought?
Okay, from roads to orbit, let's look up. SpaceX had an announcement.
They did. Posted about a Falcon 9 launch from Florida. 23 Starlink satellites went up, but the key part, 13 of them had direct-to-cell capability.
Right, and the context, including replies and Starlink's own info, explains what that means. These satellites can talk directly to regular cell phones on the ground. No special equipment needed, so global text, calls, basic data, IoT stuff, all without needing cell towers. That could be huge for remote places.
And they are not messing around with the rollout speed. This launch was June 10th, just hours before the post. But they had already launched 27 similar satellites just back on May 28th. Space.com data suggests their launch rate is up, like 10–15% compared to 2024. they're pushing this capability hard.
It's a massive potential disruption for traditional mobile carriers, right?
Right.
Could bypass towers entirely in some regions.
Oh, yeah.
Think about connectivity in really rural or developing areas. Of course, the long-term reliability, signal strength to a normal phone. Organizations like I are still studying how well that will work consistently.
So thinking about you, how much could this satellite-to-phone tech change things globally, especially for places off the grid now? And what happens to all those traditional cell towers and the companies that own them?
All right, big shift now. Let's get into some of the posts touching on global affairs and sort of societal commentary.
First, a major headline from Watcher.guru. U.S. and China apparently agreed in principle on a new trade deal framework. This was after talks in London, Juneteenth.
Yeah, and the context immediately brings up that 2019 G20 photo, Trump and Xi shaking hands. That moment was basically the prelude to years of tariff hikes, hitting like 145% by April 2025, according to some reports.
So this agreement in principle, it follows a shaky truce from May in Geneva, where tariffs did come down a bit, 30% U.S., 10% China. But crucially, the context stresses there are no real specifics yet in this London framework. It's just principles.
And a huge factor hanging over this, highlighted in the context, is rare earth minerals. China controls something like 90% of the global market and started restricting exports back in April. That's messing up supply chains and might be giving China leverage to push the U.S. on things like semiconductor restrictions just to get trade flowing again. U.S. Commerce Secretary Litnick hinted at this pressure.
The economic hit is real, too. The World Bank actually lowered its 2025 global growth forecast to 2.3%, specifically blaming these ongoing trade fights. It's messy with global impacts. We're just laying out the facts and angles from the source, staying neutral here.
It really makes you ponder, for you. What does agreement in principle actually mean in trade talks like this? Is it real progress or just kicking the can down the road? And how much power does controlling key resources like rare earths give a nation today?
Okay, turning to social commentary now. Elon Musk shared a video link. It featured someone criticizing recent protests in Los Angeles.
Right. The speaker in that video argued the protests weren't helping, might early turn off potential voters, and were causing infrastructure damage.
And the context connects this to specific events. Protests related to immigration and IC activity in LA. Things got pretty tense when the president sent in the National Guard, which then led to California filing legal challenges.
The points made by the speaker in the video do line up with some academic work on protests. Research by folks like Chenoweth and Stephan back in 2011 suggested nonviolent protests tend to be more successful historically than ones involving violence or major disruption. Again, just presenting the arguments and context provided in the material.
So, for you thinking about this, how do these different ways of looking at protests influence how people see them and how effective they are? What makes one form of protest seem more legitimate or impactful than another?
Then there was this post from an account called I, Hypocrite. It raised questions about aid projects, specifically wells built by Mr. Beast in Africa.
Yeah, the claim was pretty stark, that the wells weren't maintained and stopped working.
And the conversation in the replies brought up this really interesting historical parallel. A 17th century Portuguese bridge in Ethiopia, the Sabura Dildi, or Broken Bridge, it got destroyed in WWDC, never rebuilt locally, and now people cross the river using ropes nearby.
Wow. That comparison really hammers home this point about sustainability for projects built by outsiders. The thread implied it's a complex issue, maybe involving local economics or culture or systems, but underscores that maintenance is just as vital as the initial build.
So, thinking about that post and bridge story, what does it suggest to you about the real challenges of development aid? Who's ultimately responsible for making sure these projects last? The donor, the community, or is it more complicated?
Okay, switching gears to something much lighter. Terrible posted a video titled A Real-Life Chun-Li.
Right, this featured a Japanese kickboxer, Mona Kimura, and she was just dominating her opponent using this one technique, the cut kick, over and over.
And the Chun-Li comparison is perfect, right? From Street Fighter, famous for her kicks. Kimura, with her mastery of that one powerful kick, really looks the part in real life.
The context mentioned her background too, years and years of karate training since she was a kid, which explains her incredible balance and power with that specific move. It's all about that dedicated practice.
It's funny how these online comparisons can make you appreciate a specific skill. For you, what does it take, do you think, to get that good at one single powerful thing, whether it's sports or art or work?
Okay, last one. This was a politically charged post from the anonymous account at Uranon Central.
The claim was bold. And just like that, MAGA now opposes the Second Amendment.
The context suggests this was likely triggered by the Trump administration sending the National Guard into L.A. for those immigration protests back on June 7th. And maybe part of that involved restricting firearms in the protest areas, leading someone to claim that meant opposing the Second Amendment, the right to bear arms.
But, and this is important, the material immediately gives strong counter-context. Pew Research data from just July 2024 showed 83% of Republicans prioritize gun rights. That seems to directly contradict the idea the whole MAGA movement suddenly flipped on the Second Amendment. It makes the initial claim look more like, perhaps, an overstatement about a specific protest policy.
And crucially, the context also flagged the source itself. It mentioned a Reddit thread from 2020 discussing it URAnon Central, noting its rapid growth, but also past instances where its claims were debunked. So, basically a warning. Take this claim with a huge grain of salt without seeing actual proof, like an official statement. We're just laying out the claim, the counter-evidence, and the questions about the source that were provided.
Yeah, this one really highlights that challenge for you online, especially with politics. How do you judge claims like this? What context, what counterpoints, what questions about who is saying it do you need before you trust something you see?
And that wraps up our tour through this batch of posts. We covered a lot: cutting-edge AI, self-driving tech on Earth and in space, big shifts in global trade, and some really varied social and political observations.
It really shows how much is going on beneath the surface of these trending topics. Looking past the headline or the initial tweet, that's where the interesting stuff often lies.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So as you think back on all this, the speed of tech change, the difficulties in global cooperation, the complexities around protests and aid we touched on, here's something to chew on. With all these massive linked challenges, how do we figure out where to put our energy, our resources, both individually and together, to actually make the most positive, lasting difference?
Definitely something to think about. Thanks again for sending in the sources that fueled this deep dive today.